I'm hoping that you can all hear me out there in cyberspace as I welcome you to what is a very momentous occasion for Altiorem, the launch of our first report, or our first original report. We have hundreds of reports in the Altiorem library, which, of course, if you hadn't seen it till now, please do join and check out the wealth of resources that we have there. We do have a lot of people just dribbling in, so I'm going to go slow to start just while we wait for people that are coming in via the lobby. But while we're sort of waiting for those people to arrive, I want to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional owners on the land where I'm coming to you from, which is today known as Leichhardt in Sydney. I think in this report, which we're going to talk about today, a more appropriate idea of traditional stewardship that Aboriginal people in Australia have had for 60,000 years couldn't be more apt than the idea of how business needs to thrive in a sustainable economy. So now it looks like the numbers are slowing down as they're coming in. So what I'd like to open with is by just telling you a little bit about Altiorem before introducing Sara, who authored the report and will explain some of the key findings. Now, you should have received the report via email already, and if you haven't, you'll be able to access it on the Altiorem website. So as many of you will know, Altiorem is a sustainable finance library. Our mission is to support people in becoming more effective advocates and being able to implement the changes that are needed to bring around a more sustainable financial system. We do that in a Wikipedia-style community-built model where we have university students working with industry professionals in an iterative process to summarise and categorise research in such a way as to be action-orientated and ready for people to use and start to change the world of finance in their day-to-day jobs. Now, one of the things that allows us to do, because we obviously see a lot of research in that process of building this community-built library, is to recognise when some questions or some research topics require more to be done on them, and we need to be talking about certain issues more. And one that, surprisingly as it might be in the sector that we work in the finance sector, is the nature of business models and how they need to adapt and evolve in order to be able to fit within a sustainable economy. And why does this question need more done on it? I don't think you need to look much further than a lot of the ESG research scores and indices that you see. So why is Philip Morris in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index? Why is Coca-Cola one of the circular economy leaders in the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Index for Circular Economies? There's clearly something missing, because I think most of us will have looked at these types of ratings and scores throughout our career and our work and scratch our heads a little bit as to how the outcomes are what they are. And so what makes this report that you're going to hear about today so important is I think it really lifts the lid on some of those underlying drivers of how businesses operate, why they do the things they do, how they do the things they do, what their purpose and role is in the economy. Those types of deeper questions are not often discussed and certainly not a part of traditional ESG ratings. The other thing that makes the report really unique and important is that rather than looking at the world as it is today and how we might incrementally improve, whether on environmental or social factors, it actually flips that on its head and looks at the type of economy that we're going to need if we're going to be able to live within planetary boundaries and be able to have an equitable and fair society and have sustainable human development, and then examines where are businesses falling short in terms of the current business models and the way that they're set up, and what will need to change in order for us to get there. And so Sara is going to tell us all about that in just a moment. And then we're going to hear from an excellent panel of speakers who will be moderated by Altiorem's own head of research, Alexandra Brown, and I'll come back and introduce them after Sara talks to you about her new report. So over to you, Sara.
Thank you, Pablo. So let me just share my screen. Great. So my name is Sara Fossum, and I work as a sustainability manager in Laerdal Medical. And I have authored this report together with Altiorem. So this project actually started as part of my master's in sustainability back in 2021, and we have been working on this report ever since then. So we're very excited to be presenting this to you today. So today I will go through the key kind of findings throughout the report, and I will have specific focus on the sustainable business model canvas. But first, let me just briefly take you through the findings or the key kind of content in the report. So first, we're looking at what it takes to achieve a sustainable economy. Then we look at what are the main sustainability issues with the contemporary business model trying to fit into a sustainable economy. Then we look at how business models need to change in order to fit in and even thrive in a sustainable economy. And then lastly, we're presenting the sustainable business model canvas that kind of brings it all together. And we also explain how you might use that. So in the report, we are addressing different frameworks and approaches to a sustainable economy. Some of these include the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Footprint Network. But we've had a specific focus on the Doughnut Economics. And the reason for this is because it's an easy understandable model, yet it is complex and it encompasses all of the key elements of a sustainable economy. So the model was developed by Kate Raworth, and it is a model for a regenerative and distributive economy. So where society meets all of their needs and it thrives within the planetary boundaries. So as you can see in the model here, the inner circle represents the social foundation, and this is where all of humanity meets their needs and there is equal opportunities and a life of dignity for all. Whereas the outer circle represents the ecological ceiling, which are the planetary boundaries in which resource use and emission cannot be exceeded if we are to attain a healthy and safe environment. So then we look into the contemporary business model and identify the key areas in which are the challenges in fitting into a sustainable economy. So the first one is linearity and the take-make-waste system. The second one is the short-term mindset and the excessive focus on the short-term gains that is really undermining the long-term value creation. Then we have growth and profit maximization. And this is not to say that growth and profit are not important, because they're also important parts of a sustainable business model, but however, to a certain extent. So what we see in today's business model is that there is an excessive focus on growth and profit in itself, and it's kind of a goal in itself. And this is really driving unsustainable practices throughout the company's business model. And then we have exploitative and unequal distribution. And this is where the supply chain is exploitative in both socially and environmentally. And what this means, or some example of this, is poor working conditions throughout the value chain and also lack of environmental protection throughout the supply chain and value chain. And then lastly, we have operational efficiency as a sustainability strategy. And this is kind of going back to what Pablo addressed in the beginning. So sustainability has gained a lot of momentum especially during the last few years, and we're seeing a lot of companies developing sustainability strategies. However, the issue here is that they often put this strategy on top of their business as usual, and they're not implementing it into the core of their business model. And often they fail to address the demand side of their business. They mainly focus on the supply side, and we will get back to that later on. And this is why we have developed the Sustainable Business Model Canvas. So the idea of this canvas is really to kind of bring it all together and have a look into the whole business model and what it takes to transition into a sustainable business model. So here we have 5 areas. We have purpose, organization, production, delivery, and impact. And I will now take you through each of these areas. So first we have purpose, and this is a key element of a company's foundation. And in a sustainable economy, all businesses essentially need to have a purpose that is contributing towards attaining a thriving and healthy society and environment. And what this means is that the company needs to directly or indirectly contribute in creating social or environmental value. And an example of a company that is having a purpose-driven business model is the UK-based Recycling Lives. So the company uses its commercial operations within waste management and recycling, which obviously is producing environmental value through circularity. And they use this to support their charity program for ex-offenders in rehabilitation, which obviously is producing social value. Then we have organization, and this is another part of the business's foundation, kind of the building blocks of how the business is organized. And here we have 5 areas, the first one being ownership. So a business's owners and their objective is really elemental in how businesses focus, the choices that they make, and decisions that they take. So ultimately, an owner's objective is influencing all parts of a business model. And what we see in the contemporary business model are obviously the issues related to the focus on short-term gains and profit maximization, and which are obviously driving unsustainable practices. So some of the alternatives ownership models that exist, such as the employee ownership, we've seen that can tend to ease some of those challenges that we see with the traditional ownership models. Then we have value distribution throughout the supply chain. So from a social perspective, a business needs to be inclusive and distributive by design. And what this means is that the value that is created throughout the value chain needs to be more equally distributed throughout the value chain. And from an environmental perspective, environmental protection and regeneration needs to be a fundamental part of the business's operation and production processes throughout the supply chain. And then we have networks, and a company's networks are their key stakeholders. So this refers to, for example, the customers, suppliers, partners, and distributors. And as companies set targets and set their values and missions, in order to reach those, they're really dependent on their network. So ultimately, they need to ensure that their network is aligned with their mission and their values. And in addition, in order to attain, a low carbon and circular economy, which is the goal, we're very dependent on building infrastructures and ecosystems that can facilitate this. And this is dependent on different industries collaborating and partnering to facilitate. And then we have operational time frame. So currently the excessive focus on the short-term gains is, as I've mentioned before, really undermining the ability to create long-term and sustainable value. So ultimately, in order for a company to become more sustainable, they really need to shift away from a short-term mindset towards one that is one of the long-term and focuses on sustainable value creation. Then lastly, we have governance. So governance and ESG reporting is really key, not only to drive sustainable actions throughout the company, but also to monitor and control its indicators. And additionally, it's also key for the company to be able to communicate their performance to their stakeholders, and to do so in a honest and transparent way. Additionally, investors really need adequate ESG data in order to be able to steer their capital towards one of sustainable development. So an example of a company where we can see that all of these elements are really kind of coming together and how they influence each other is in Laerdal Medical, the company where I work. So the company is a family-owned business, and it is a really purpose-driven business. So we have a mission of helping save 1 million more lives every year by 2030. And it's really evident how, the family, the owners, and their values of both, creating social impact and doing so in a sustainable, environmentally sustainable way is really driving the business throughout the business model. So for example, with operational time frame, we can see that we really have the ability to focus on long-term value creation rather than the short-term gains. And I think this is much due to the ownership model. Then we have production, and this is the supply side of a company's business operations. So for a company to achieve a sustainable production of their goods and services, there are really three main things that they need to focus on. The first one is energy and resource efficiency. So this refers to using fewer materials and using less energy, creating less waste and less pollution, but doing so in creating similar functionalities. Then we have circularity. This refers to creating value from waste, keeping resources in the loop, and ultimately designing out waste from its production line. Then we have using renewable and natural processes rather than non-renewables and man-made artificial production systems. So an example of a company that is really driving a circular system is Tomra, and they're operating in a clean loop recycling system where they provide payments for returned bottles that are made of plastic, aluminium, and glass. And just how effective this kind of system can be is really evident in Norway, where I'm from, because here we have this kind of system, and out of our drinking bottles, 92% of them are recycled. So next we have delivery, and this represents the demand side of a business's operations. And here is really key. In order for a business to attain a sustainable business model, it needs to go beyond the supply side and also tackle the demand side. So what this means is that they need to address sufficiency of their value creation, so they do not promote overconsumption. And some ways in which businesses can do that, and we have some case studies of that in the report as well, is digitalization through circularity, and also such as leasing models and that kind of things. So an example of a company that is promoting sufficiency in its business model is Citizen Wolf, and they are a t-shirt manufacturer that offer free alterations and repair of t-shirts. And in addition, they also have a made-to-order strategy. So ultimately, they are really avoiding emission and waste and also commercial loss. Lastly, we have impact, and this is where it kind of all gets together and you see the total impact of a company. So in order to become a sustainable company, a business needs to assess their total impact on a continuous level to ensure that they are doing what they're intended to do. So this means that they need to assess how well they're delivering on the value and their purpose, and assess the value that they've actually created. In addition to this, they also need to address their externalities, because even though not all impact is intended impact, it's still important to address their both positive and negative externalities throughout their value chain, and to make continuous improvement based on this kind of assessment. And a company that at least have started to look into this kind of total impact assessment is Puma. So they have a system called environmental profit and loss, where they use a life cycle assessment approach to assess the environmental cost of their products throughout the value chain. They're also working on improving their or adding, the positive impact that the products make throughout the value chain into this equation. So that was a brief overview of the Sustainable Business Model Canvas. And obviously you can read more into detail about each of these areas in the report, and there are also more case studies. And this Sustainable Business Model Canvas and the report is really made for businesses and investors to be able to assess their own alignments with a sustainable economy. So it's to see and identify potential improvement areas, but also identify, where is it possible to change and where might it not be, and how will that affect my ability to fit into a sustainable economy? Because hopefully that is where we are heading. So with that, I'm saying thank you, and I'm handing over back to Pablo or Alexandra.
Thank you, Sara. Terrific. And I think to go back to my original comments about ESG metrics and the nature of how we think about sustainability in many respects or many areas today, a lot of those critical areas around dealing with the demand side, around ownership, around purpose, they're not really addressed, and this is why a lot of the ratings and other things that we see often seem counterintuitive. And so we're so lucky today to have an awesome panel who couldn't be better placed to talk about the insights that have come from Sara's report and how we then might take those forward into business practice, in ownership practices and investment. So we have Susheela Perez da Costa. So she's long-time supporter of Altiorem, actually spoke at our launch event a few years ago, and so we're delighted to have her back in our second event, even though it's a few years later and a pandemic later. Susheela's the principal and founder of the Stewardship Centre, where she helps support investors in tackling a lot of these really important questions, and is also a director on organisations like Beyond Zero Emissions and the Shareholder Commons, which I think you can gather from the names of those organisations are very much aligned with that future-looking state of how do we get to where we need to be, as opposed to just incrementally improving from where we are. We also have Martin Rich, who is, after a career in finance spanning many organisations, established the Future Fit Foundation and the Future Fit Framework. And again, like the work that Susheela does, Martin identified early on that we need to really look at where are we going? Where are we trying to get to from a sustainable economy perspective, and set out some benchmarks. And so the Future Fit Foundation and the Future Fit Framework has a benchmark which includes 23 break-even goals. So these are base requirements just to even consider yourself sustainable, and then 24 positive pursuits which companies can take and benchmark themselves against. And so if you can imagine taking the work that Sara's done on the business model canvas that we've been able to produce through Altiorem, and conceptually understanding those key drivers, and then you wonder, well, how do I then move forward? Something like the Future Fit Foundation is a good place to go. And then certainly on the investor side, in terms of how you might take the insights from the report and try and examine the companies that you invest in, Susheela would be one of the leaders globally to be able to go and speak to about those really deeper issues. And lastly, I just want to introduce again Alexandra Brown, who is our head of research and also the founder of the Ethical Invest Group. Alexandra has long been supporting financial advisors around Australia to help them support their clients in addressing these needs. And so over the next 30 minutes or so, you'll be able to hear from Sara and our speakers, and please do continue to put questions into the chat because we'll seek to address them as well. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, everyone on the panel as well. And if you're watching online, welcome. And if you're watching the replay, also welcome. I think we might just kick off this conversation first with Martin. And having read the report, we've just heard from Sara. Please, could you give us your reflections on the report, and also how it complements other frameworks, including, of course, Future Fit, and where it might be different?
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everybody from the UK. Forgive the cup of tea, but it is really quite early here, and it's also quite dark. So I hope you can see me okay. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Yeah, look, congratulations on the report, and Sara particularly for all the work you've put into it. I think it's fantastic. to have drawn all of that thinking together and sort of pulled it into this one place and produced the canvas. I think it's a great way of framing what we need for a truly sustainable future. As you rightly say, this is the focus of Future Fit. And what I love about this report is actually it's pulling together a number of threads in that the Doughnut Economic Model and Future Fit are both built upon the same underlying system science. It's a thing colloquially known as the natural step, and I know the natural step is known within Australia, even though it actually comes all the way from this side of the world, comes from Sweden originally, has the fantastic name of the Framework for Strategic Sustainable Development is its technical name. I think the natural step is much better. And that is an underlying system science description of what we need for a flourishing society on a flourishing planet. And of course, if business is to succeed in the long term, then arguably flourishing business needs to sit within that society, within the flourishing planet. As somebody has once said, you can't do any business on a dead planet. And I think it's really interesting that as we're looking at these, effectively these new socioeconomic models, we're looking at these new paradigms that we're trying to create. Actually, we've all ended up going back in our own ways to this underlying system science, to this set of principles that describe what we need. And then each of us have come forward again with a slightly different explanation of how to use those, all of which are ultimately very, very complementary. So we have the economic donut model, which is effectively describing the socioeconomic model that we want to move to. Sara's already been through sort of some of those things, you know, moving from the linear take, make, waste model to a fully circular model. All of these things link back to those underlying principles. Future Fit took those underlying principles and said, less about the why and more about the how. What is it you actually need to do as a company? How do you actually go through the various principles? Pablo mentioned the 23 goals. That's basically the rules of the game that you need to abide by if one day you're going to be a business that isn't damaging planet and society and is hopefully actually adding value to planet and society whilst being successful financially. Indeed, being financially successful because of the value you're bringing to planet and society, not in spite of the harm you're causing, which of course is too much of today's model. So I think it's wonderful to see all of these things drawn together in the report, and the canvas provides a wonderful overview for the company to be able to start from the top. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? What's our vision? What's our value? And then work their way through, picking up frameworks like Future Fit, trying to be part of the Doughnut Economic Model going forward, or frameworks like ECG, which you've referenced as well. So I'll stop there, but I think, you know, absolutely superb to see all of that coming together. And I really, really, really hope the report gets picked up and gets the traction it deserves.
Thanks, Martin. Couldn't agree more. And I love the focus of the how as well. In this report, rather than focusing on the issues and the barriers, the report shows through case studies just how businesses are doing things better, showing that it's not only possible, but it actually is already happening. One of my favourite examples is Tomra, which Sara mentioned in her presentation, with their clean loop recycling system and getting bottles and things, money back into the hands of consumers, and also these bottles out of landfill and our oceans, which I thought is really great. So maybe I might even go back to you, Sara, first. Were there any other case studies in the report that stood out to you as a better way of doing business, or perhaps you've got some examples of businesses that are applying the donut?
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. Yeah, so as you're saying, definitely there are a lot of companies that are you know, starting to transition to more sustainable business models, and we have addressed quite a few of them in the report. And I think one of the case studies that I think stood out to me as well, in addition to the ones that I've already covered, is the Fair B&B. And that, so you will find this case study under the purpose section. So really what Airbnb is trying to do is really tackle some of the issues that you see on, most of you probably have heard of Airbnb. And what they're doing is that they're supporting their local communities of their hosts by offering, affordable and short-term holiday rentals. So what they do is that they dedicate 50% of their platform fee to the operating cost, and the other 50% to a fund or project that the customer can choose in that specific holiday destination. So I think that's an excellent way of, really, I guess, capitalizing on this kind of value that you can create through holiday rentals, but at the same time really support the local community rather than taking away or some of the challenges that we've seen with, for example, Airbnb.
Yeah, great example. Martin and Susheela, it'd also be great to hear some examples from you of companies that you've seen in your work that are doing business better. Perhaps Susheela first.
This is a really tricky one for me. One of the reasons for that is that my background has been around working with institutional investors for a very long time. And so the majority of companies that I've had occasion to dive deeply into have been really large, very established, public listed companies who are run for shareholders. And that kind of brings me to one of the questions that came through, which is around barriers. And I think it's a fantastic thing that this report has focused on the positive case studies and lighting the way and the pathways that are possible to take and are in fact being taken right. Really opportunities, I think, is barriers, figuring out how to unlock them. So one of the reasons I love the TOMRA example is because I like to think that an organisation I worked for a little while ago played a tiny little part in allowing that to become more successful. We were involved in talking to a number of food and beverage companies in Australia, and one of the things that we identified was that the recycling rates weren't something that they were really encouraging to the degree that needed to happen, other than through curbside recycling, which we all know is not a very efficient way of recycling anything. It turned out that actually these food and beverage companies were part of an industry organisation that was lobbying hard for years against the extension of container deposit legislation in New South Wales. And that container deposit legislation is what has actually made it possible for organisations like TOMRA to become economic in resource recovery. So in New South Wales, we didn't have a system like that, even though it had been operating really successfully in South Australia and the Northern Territory for many years. Many of us as children, would buy a can of drink or a bottle of drink or whatever, and you'd see this 10-cent refund thing and your eyes would light up, because 10 cents was a lot of money back when I was a child. And then you'd realise that it's only particular states where. So one of the things that we needed to do as an organisation was get those really big companies to understand that that wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to be preventing something pro-social legislation that would have allowed things to become economic. So one of the, I don't know if I've really answered your question. I think I've gone way off base actually, but I think it's really important to understand that a big part of what enables these business models to emerge and to flourish, and eventually we hope to come to dominate, is the total context in which they operate. And while this report doesn't identify barriers, as we all go through our processes in the various corners in which we operate, we are going to spot barriers. And one of the great things is to be able to call those out so that someone can do something about them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Martin, did you have anything more to add on that one?
Not on that specific point. I think Susheela raises a great point around the barriers and taking that sort of more systemic view, and that's about the organisation addressing, the sort of the silos within itself and trying to pull those together. Otherwise, as Susheela just said, you sort of get one piece sort of trying to do something good, while actually another part of the organisation might be actively sort of lobbying against that or just moving in a different way. And I think that's that's important. If I can cite one example, I would actually, in that part of the world, I would jump over the Tasman Sea to the neighbours in New Zealand. And I would point to an organisation called Tourism Holdings Limited, THL, the SUV RV rentals organisation that owns Brits and organisations like that, which I'm sure many listeners would be familiar with. And that's an organisation that has actually always had a very social and environmental sort of set of values and goals at its heart, recognizing that ultimately, if you're traveling to New Zealand or Australia or various parts of the US where they work, ultimately, if we totally trash the planet, there's nothing to go and see. These beautiful places that you are, as a visitor, you're renting one of their vehicles. The whole point is to go and see that part of the countryside. And obviously, if we degrade it to such an extent, then sort of you could argue slightly enlightened self-interest, as well as just a genuine sort of heartfelt desire to protect the people and the planet where they operate. And this is an organisation that a good few years ago now really embraced Future Fit as a model to help them think about where did they go next. They'd done an awful lot of work, they'd really sort of pushed the boundaries, but then had sort of slightly run into a point of, well, where do we go beyond here? They'd sort of, I suppose it's, you don't know what you don't know. And what they then found with Future Fit was this wonderful framework. They said, wow, that's what we want to look like. Let's start going down that route. But the point I want to make is that what really, really resonated for me very recently when I spoke to them was they said, what we've realized is we're no longer using Future Fit as a toolkit that we've appended to the business in some way. It's not something we've, it's not a bag that we've thrown in the back of the SUV to help us on our journey. It's actually become a core mindset. And they said, I hope you don't mind, we're talking about it in this way. I nearly I wanted to lean through the camera and hug them. This is absolutely the right idea, is that you are embedding this type of mindset into everything you do, all your employees, everywhere you work, that you take the sustainable mindset, call it Future Fit, call it what you will, but that every single decision you are making is trying to take you more in that direction. Things are not easy. Susheela really opened that up. Things are not easy. There aren't black and white decisions here. There's always and often trade-offs. But if you're thinking in that way, you're beginning to move in the right direction, and these decisions become easier. The conflicts in some ways start to fall aside. So if people listening want to go to the THL website, you'll see a great example of an integrated report there that sort of does exactly what the canvas is encouraging us to do.
Fantastic, because there is an audience question here, and it actually says many companies do have excellent sustainability reports, and so perhaps more of what's written in those sustainability reports is actually included in the main reports. And they've said, although I like them, these sustainability reports, does that further actually set the idea that these concepts are not compatible? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Susheela, you
Sarah.
go.
Thanks, Sara. I think the dirty little secret is that in many cases they are not compatible, right? Like, that's the problem that we need to crack. That's the nut we need to crack as a society. And that's why one of the reasons this report is so great is that it calls this out openly. It starts from what we need instead of coming kind of backwards from where are we and how can we, improve it at the margins. We've had the most hilarious examples over the trajectory of sustainability development that has happened, at least in the Australian market. I imagine it's very similar elsewhere. We had airlines who had whole pages in their annual reports talking about how they planned to get to net zero by 2050. Mind you, this was like around 2010 that they were saying it. And they and talking, glowingly about how they'd electrified all of their ground fleet. And part of the problem is that a lot of this reporting has been driven by the investment community, and the investment community loves numbers. And so lots of the kinds of things, and I too want to plug the Future Fit Business Benchmark. It is amazing. I like to think that Martin and I are co-conspirators from a few years back now. But the main problem is that when you focus on what you can collect numbers for and stick in a spreadsheet, you're not necessarily asking the right questions. You've got very precise answers that work really nicely for computing averages and portfolio, numbers, all sorts of statistics, to exactly the wrong questions. And we need to be really proactive as communities, as investors, as businesses, in ensuring the right questions are being asked, even if they have really imperfect answers. And that's the thing that the Future Fit Business Benchmark did. And at the time that I last looked at it, nobody else in the entire world of research and frameworks was doing that.
Fantastic. Sara, did you have something to add to that one too?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, Susheela, because I really see like where you're coming from. But I also, because I was going to say that, often the solution can be to make it as part of, that you also report sustainability related numbers as part of your annual report, and maybe incorporate that into the financial or the corporate financial department. So I think like in a long-term setting, I really understand that, these are different things, and they, maybe we need to ensure that we ask the right questions, as you say, about sustainability. But what I've also have seen is that often, currently in the contemporary business models, what is driving, a lot of actions, and where, there are good reporting systems in the financial department. So you've also seen that, that could be a successful way of implementing, at least if you're starting to report and capture data on sustainability related areas, then it could be beneficial to incorporate it as part of what you already are good at reporting on, if that makes sense. But yeah, I guess there's benefits and challenges with both approaches.
There is. And I guess another question here is talking about also financial reporting and quarterly financial reporting and performance measurement based on that. And this is obviously very short-term objectives. And I'd love to hear from the panel here, how can we change this? How can we affect a long-term thinking in these business models and a more systemic change across that as well? Martin, perhaps.
I think these two questions actually tie together extremely well. Undoubtedly, we have an extraordinarily short-term focus. We see that in business through quarterly reports, driven, of course, mainly by the investor world, as Susheela's talked about. But we see it in the political world. We see it in our daily lives. And in some ways, sort of reporting is not the answer to this, but I think it plays an element within it. I do think the road to hell will be paved with sustainability reports. I think most of them are absolutely hysterical. You're absolutely right, Susheela. And they also, they really do show just how disaggregated these types of this type of thinking is within businesses. If you produce a financial report and a sustainability report, that tells me straight away you are not integrating the two. You are worried about your finance and your business, and there's the sustainability stuff you're doing over here. The true leaders, those who are really trying to shift things, almost all of them inevitably produce one report. Why? Because they're trying to do business in a sustainable way. That is the right way of thinking. If you are producing the two separately, then probably all you're trying to do is business as usual, more efficiently. And that is simply slowing down ever so slightly the speed at which the Titanic is heading towards the iceberg. And so we
Right.
have all these reports and people running around telling us how much they're turning the Titanic. No, you're not. You're not doing. If you're reducing your carbon emissions, okay, that's better than doing nothing, but it is not doing good. It's doing less harm. Because you're still emitting greenhouse gases, right? Yeah. So we are continuing to steam towards the iceberg rather than launching the lifeboats and creating a new set of ships, of rafts that will take us on an alternative journey, again, as described by things like the Doughnut. So to me, all of those things are about long-term thinking. So as we continue to focus on quarterly earnings, no, we're not going to be moving in the right direction. It was really interesting back in the day when Paul Polman took over at Unilever, you know, a company that is often mentioned, far from perfect, but, you know, Paul and the team there tried to do a lot of really good stuff. And one of the first things he did was to get rid of that pressure and basically turn around to shareholders and say, look, if you're just going to focus on the quarterly earnings, we don't want you as shareholders. An incredibly brave and radical move. Now, how do we actually break that cycle within the investors? That's something I do spend a lot of time thinking about myself, but I think at this point I'll just hand the baton over to Susheela and say, what are your thoughts, Susheela, on how do we break this this quarterly focus? Not an easy question, sorry.
I mean, one way that the quarterly focus is being diminished in places where it is being diminished is by giving a much more significant voice to permanent and universal investors. And you guys will all probably be familiar with me talking about that, and I imagine a lot of the audience is as well. There are investors who resemble citizens in the sense that they have a very broad exposure, a very long-term horizon, and recognise that a lot of the ways that business extracts value from the economy and the society, captures that value by extracting it from the commons, is not in their long-term interests, because their long-term interests depend on a healthy commons. You know, we've all got lots of examples of these, climate change being the textbook one. Those investors are now starting to get active about the idea that they don't want those returns to be captured by the companies they own if they come at the expense of the rest of their portfolio or of the invisible assets that underpin those portfolios. You can think about things like, the public health impact of an unrestrained pandemic. You can think about the economic impact of fake news in our supply chains of information and the result that that had on governments, what kinds of governments got in, what kinds of sustainability impact those governments had globally. All of those kinds of things are very hard to ignore today in a way that they were much easier to ignore when I began my work in this field. And we are getting good, solid engagement from some of the larger, more thoughtful investors about what can be done. I should give a little plug to one of the organisations I'm involved with, the Shareholder Commons. I'd really encourage anybody who's interested in kind of this angle, how can investors do this stuff, to go have a look at some of the work that they're doing right now on things like antimicrobial resistance, on climate change and so on. But again, it's hard, Martin. You know, we have a much bigger context, and even those investors are a minority within the investment context. And they aren't necessarily the ones that are always the ones being paid attention to by the firms, right? So if you are a firm that is run by Paul Polman and has the guts to do that kind of thing, you're okay with annoying some of your shareholders and having them walk away. A lot of companies are not in that position. And the individual decision makers in that company may be vulnerable themselves. So you end up with a different decision maker being elected to the board if they don't conform to the existing shareholders' rules. So this is a whole complex, interdependent set of actors. And Pablo was right in the beginning when he was talking about it being all about systems. There is a lot of systems theory out there that talks about focusing on where you have points of leverage, on understanding what feedback loops are. We need to get much more fluent with some of those concepts and how to apply them.
Thank you, Susheela. We are running short of time. I've just got a quick couple more questions. The first one is, considering all of the things that we've just spoken about, and we've spoken heavily about investors, but what role does government need to play to encourage sustainable business models in line with the canvas?
Does anyone want me to go first?
You can certainly go, Susheela.
I'll try and keep it really
We're going
brief
to keep
room.
them down to about 30 seconds.
Yeah. So government sets the laws, and the laws are the entire context for the economy and business and citizens and everything else. So the main thing governments need to do is make sure that they are being influenced by the right interests that have sustainability outcomes and not status quo outcomes as their driving force.
Nice.
I can add one quick thing to that, which is government and regulation are always the floor, not the ceiling. They're the stick, not the carrot. And so anybody who is ever just abiding by the rules will be doing is business hygiene. It's doing the base minimum you need to. So we need to encourage governments to be lifting the floor as often as we can, but we need to recognize that, you know, no government is ever going to be for a while promoting future fit or Doughnut Economics or something like that, but we have to encourage them to raise the floor as high as they can.
I just have to jump in there because it wouldn't be a panel unless I violently disagreed. I don't want them raising the floor. I want them tilting the field.
I would agree with that.
That's great. Thank you so much, everyone. Sara, I just want to finish up with you because thank you so much for this excellent report. Obviously, it stirred some great discussion. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everyone's questions today. But Sara, what's one key takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, I think, and thank you so much for all of your engagement and support. And yes, it's very exciting. I just want to leave everyone with, I think one of the key kind of like going back to the root of the issues that we are encountering in the economy. I think that is key to understand, because I don't think we will ever be able to reach a sustainable economy if we do not tackle the root issue. And I believe the root issue is that we define success and development in the completely wrong way. So, for example, looking at GDP as a measure of, you know, development and economic welfare is so wrong. And it also really translates into personal lives and into, you know, businesses. So, you know, ultimately, we need to look at what do we want to achieve as humanity? Like, what do we want? How do we want to develop into the future? And we need to redefine what success is. And it's more about, you know, personal development and feeling, you know, a sense of belonging and contribute with your skills. And I think that that is what will take us to a more sustainable economy, when we really understand what are the important factors here, not only financial value, but also so many other aspects.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sara. And I will now hand over to Pablo to close today's session.
Thanks. Sara's comments would have been a fabulous way to finish, but those of you who know me will know that I couldn't help but jump in with a few thoughts of my own. So I'm just going to quickly, I think Susheela nailed something earlier. Ursula Le Guin said that there are no right answers to wrong questions. And I think we all in this community of ours that are thinking about sustainability, business sustainability, need to really think about whether we're asking the right questions. And if the questions that we're asking are producing some of the results we're seeing and they seem just completely wrong, then perhaps we ought to go back and redress some of those questions. Altiorem was built by our community. It's built by people like Sara. This report was built out of Altiorem, which is all of you. And so what I'd encourage you to do is, we think that all of you have something to say, something to contribute. And part of what we are trying to achieve is to provide a platform for new voices, for different voices, for ideas for how we can do business and investment better and in more sustainable ways. And so please engage with us, be a mentor, be a contributor, look to write with us. We are here to help promote the voices that are looking to drive a more sustainable economy, and use the resources, because these resources which we are collecting are recommended by our membership community. They're resources which have helped other people in delivering outcomes. That's how we curate information. And in a world where we're just drowning in noise around sustainability and the argy-bargy of wokeism versus something else, Altiorem can be a place you can go where you've got carefully curated information by a community of people who actually care about a better future. And so I would love to have you all more involved, and I would just also want to just commend Sara on her excellent work. It's been a pleasure being able to support her through this, and we, I think, see so many theses from masters that just wind up collecting dust on shelves. And so for us to have the opportunity to take this excellent piece of work and turn it into something that hopefully we can spread, we're delighted at that chance. So so thank you, Sara, and thank you all for tuning in. And and I should actually, of course, thank Martin especially, because it is so early over there. We really appreciate it, and Susheela also for contributing to the discussion, and Alexandra for moderating it so well. So thank you.